Welcome to this journey into the forgotten shadows of American history. Before we begin, I want to ask you something. Take a moment and tell me in the comments, where are you watching this from, and what time is it right now? Are you alone? Are the lights off? There's something about these stories that feels different depending on when and where we hear them. And trust me, what you're about to discover will stay with you long after this video ends. Today, we travel back to 1887, to a place that barely exists on modern maps. Hollow Creek, Pennsylvania. A small mining community nestled in the Allegheny Mountains, surrounded by dense forests that seemed to swallow sound itself. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where secrets were kept behind closed doors and proper smiles, where the church bells marked time in a town that felt suspended outside of it. It was October of that year when Margaret Whitmore disappeared. 19 years old, daughter of Charles Whitmore, one of the town's most successful merchants. She vanished 3 days before what should have been the happiest day of her life. Her wedding to Thomas Caldwell, heir to one of the largest landholdings in the region, was planned down to the smallest detail. The dress had been fitted, the flowers ordered from Philadelphia, the church decorated with white ribbons that still hung there, ghostly, days after she vanished. When Margaret's mother entered her daughter's bedroom that October morning, she found the bed made, the window slightly open, and Margaret's engagement ring placed carefully on the nightstand. Not dropped, not lost, placed, as if she had removed it with intention, with finality. The town searched for 7 days. Every mine shaft, every creek bed, every abandoned cabin in those endless woods. Thomas Caldwell barely slept, his voice growing hoarse from calling her name into the darkness. Her father offered a reward that could have bought 3 houses. The Reverend led prayer circles that went deep into the night, and then, on the 8th day, they found her. But not where anyone expected, not lost in the woods or drowned in the creek. They found Margaret Whitmore in the town cemetery, in a place she had no reason to be, in a place that would change everything anyone thought they knew about Hollow Creek. She was in the old section, where the founding families were buried, in a stone chamber that hadn't been opened in decades. The entrance had been freshly disturbed, the iron gate that had rusted shut now standing open like a mouth. Inside, Margaret sat upright in her wedding dress, perfect, preserved, as if she had simply fallen asleep during her own ceremony. Her skin showed no signs of decomposition, despite a week in that cold stone chamber. Her hands were folded in her lap, holding a bouquet of dried flowers that looked ancient, as if they had been preserved for years, waiting for this exact moment. But she was not alone in that chamber. Dr. Jonathan Ashford was the first medical professional to examine the scene. A respected physician, 34 years old, educated in Philadelphia. He had returned to Hollow Creek 5 years earlier to care for the community that raised him. His initial report to the sheriff was clinical, professional, exactly what you would expect from a man of science. But his private diary, discovered decades later, told a different story. On that October evening in 1887, Dr. Ashford wrote words that still echo through the case. Of files. I recognized the preservation method immediately. I had seen it before. God forgive me, I had seen it before. What he saw in that chamber, what the authorities documented but never fully explained to the public, what the photographs taken that day revealed, we will explore together. Because Margaret Whitmore was not the first bride found in Hollow Creek Cemetery. She was the 7th, and the preservation method Dr. Ashford recognized. It was sophisticated beyond anything that should have existed in rural Pennsylvania in 1887. It was purposeful, it was ritualistic, it was evidence of something that had been happening in Hollow Creek since the town's founding in 1803. To understand what happened to Margaret Whitmore, we need to understand Hollow Creek itself. The town was founded in 1803 by 5 families who traveled together from Massachusetts, seeking land and opportunity in western Pennsylvania. The Caldwells, the Whitmores, the Ashfords, the Mercers, and the Blackwoods. These names would become synonymous with every aspect of life in Hollow Creek for the next century. They chose a valley location that was, by all accounts, unnaturally isolated. The surrounding mountains created an amphitheater effect. Sound didn't travel the way it should. Storms seemed to circle the valley rather than pass through it. The forest was so dense that even experienced hunters reported becoming disoriented within sight of the town. The 5 founding families built their homes in a specific pattern around a central square, with the church at the exact center. Historical records show they brought a preacher with them from Massachusetts, a man named Reverend Silas Cartwright, whose theological writings were considered too radical even for the relatively liberal Massachusetts congregations of the time. Cartwright's journals, preserved in the Pennsylvania Historical Society, reveal an obsession with what he called eternal matrimony. He believed that marriage was not merely an earthly contract, but a spiritual transformation that transcended death itself. His sermons spoke of wives as vessels of continuity and marriage as the mechanism by which mortal men touch immortality. These were not mainstream Christian ideas. They were something else, something that borrowed from alchemy, from Hermetic traditions, from older beliefs that the Church had long since condemned. By 1810, Hollow Creek had established itself as a modestly successful mining community. Iron ore deposits brought modest wealth. The 5 founding families intermarried, creating a web of relationships so complex that by the 1850s, nearly everyone in town was related by blood or marriage to everyone else. This is important. This isolation, this intermarriage, this insularity created an environment where unconventional beliefs could not just survive, but flourish in secret. The first documented disappearance occurred in 1814. Sarah Blackwood, 18 years old, vanished 2 weeks before her wedding to Jonathan Caldwell. The official record states she died of sudden illness and was buried in the family plot. But a newspaper article from a neighboring town, preserved in a scrapbook discovered in 1952, tells a different story. It mentions whispers of a strange ceremony and a body that appeared unnaturally preserved. The pattern continued roughly once every decade. 1823, Elizabeth Mercer. 1831, Catherine Ashford. 1842, Anne Whitmore. 1856, Rebecca Caldwell. 1869, Grace Mercer. And then in 1887, Margaret Whitmore. Always daughters of the founding families, always between the ages of 18 and 21, always shortly before a planned wedding, always found in the cemetery, preserved in wedding attire. The gaps between disappearances were long enough that patterns could be dismissed as coincidence. The town was small enough that investigations remained internal, handled by sheriffs who were themselves members of the founding families, and the preservation of the bodies was attributed to various natural explanations: cold temperatures, mineral content in the soil, unusual embalming practices. But Dr. Jonathan Ashford's medical training gave him a different perspective. In his private writings, he detailed what he observed in that chamber with Margaret Whitmore's body. The preservation was not natural, it was chemical, sophisticated, requiring knowledge of anatomy and chemistry, far beyond what should exist in a rural mining town. The substance used left a faint, crystalline residue on the skin. The internal organs had been treated with some kind of solution that prevented decay while maintaining the appearance of life. The positioning of the body required rigor mortis to be managed with precise timing. This was not folk practice. This was science being used for purposes that science should never serve. Hollow Creek in 1887 had approximately 300 residents. The 5 founding families controlled the mines, the general stores, the bank, the church, council. They were intermarried to such a degree that every major decision in town was essentially a family decision. The Caldwell estate, where Thomas lived with his father Richard and his uncle Samuel, was the largest property in the valley. The house had been built in 1805 and expanded 3 times. Local legends spoke of underground passages connecting it to other prominent homes, though no evidence was ever found. The Whitmore General Store supplied the entire town. Charles Whitmore kept meticulous ledgers that recorded every transaction, every debt, every favor owed. Those ledgers, subpoenaed during the investigation, revealed something odd. Several prominent families had debts that went back decades, but were never called in. It was as if the debt itself served some other purpose, as if owing something to the Whitmores bound families together in ways that transcended mere money. The Ashford family had produced 3 generations of physicians. Jonathan's grandfather had been the first doctor in Hollow Creek. His father had died young under circumstances never fully explained. Jonathan himself had been educated in Philadelphia, studying under some of the most progressive medical minds of the era, learning anatomy, chemistry, the new theories of preservation and embalming that were revolutionizing medical education. When he returned to Hollow Creek in 1882, he brought with him equipment and knowledge that seemed almost miraculous to the townspeople. He could do things other country doctors couldn't. He saved lives that should have been lost. He performed procedures that required chemicals and techniques straight from the most advanced medical schools. But he also brought back something else, a reluctant understanding of what his family's role had been in Hollow Creek's darkest tradition. His sister Eleanor had been one of the brides, found in 1869, when Jonathan was only 16 years old, away at school. He had come home to find her in the cemetery, preserved, perfect, dead. His journals from that period, hidden in a locked box not discovered until 1963, reveal a young man torn apart by grief and a terrible suspicion. He wrote, "Father won't speak of it. Mother has gone silent. Uncle tells me it was God's will, but there is nothing of God in what I saw. Eleanor did not die naturally. Eleanor was prepared." When Margaret Whitmore disappeared 18 years later, Dr. Jonathan Ashford was no longer a grieving boy. He was a trained physician with knowledge of anatomy, chemistry, and preservation techniques. He was also a man who recognized in that stone chamber the same method that had been used on his own sister. The question that haunted him, that haunts this case to this day, was simple but terrible. Was he supposed to be part of this? Had his education, his training, his return to Hollow Creek all been orchestrated to serve a purpose he never agreed to? The investigation into Margaret Whitmore's death began with Sheriff Thomas Brennan, himself married to a mercer, conducting what appeared to be a thorough inquiry. His official report, preserved in the county archives, documents witness interviews, examines the timeline of Margaret's disappearance, and concludes with a frustrating vagueness: death by misadventure, circumstances uncertain. But unofficial documents tell a different story. A letter from Dr. Ashford to a colleague in Philadelphia, dated November 3, 1887, describes finding evidence of systematic preparation and knowledge that should not exist in this place. He writes of symbols carved into the stone walls of the chamber, geometric patterns that seem to serve some ritualistic purpose. Margaret's maid, a woman named Clara Hughes, gave testimony that was recorded in shorthand by the court clerk but never included in the official report. That testimony, discovered in a storage box in 1971, described Margaret's behavior in the weeks before her disappearance. Clara stated that Margaret had become withdrawn, almost resigned. She stopped discussing wedding plans with enthusiasm. She spent hours writing letters that she burned immediately after finishing. 3 days before the disappearance, Clara reported finding Margaret standing at her window in the middle of the night, still fully dressed, staring at something in the distance. When Clara asked what she was looking at, Margaret replied, "The lanterns. They're calling the others." Clara saw no lanterns. Thomas Caldwell's testimony was equally disturbing. He described Margaret becoming distant, almost formal with him in the final weeks before the wedding. She asked him strange questions. Had his family always lived in Hollow Creek? Did he know what happened to the brides who came before her? Did he understand what the wedding truly meant? Thomas claimed he didn't understand these questions. He thought perhaps Margaret was suffering from pre-wedding nervousness, a common condition. But in a letter to his brother, written 2 months after Margaret's death and discovered among family papers in 1945, Thomas wrote something more honest. She knew. Somehow she had figured it out. And I couldn't protect her from what had already been decided. What had been decided? By whom? The Reverend at the time, Reverend Marcus Hallowell, was interviewed extensively. His testimony focused on Margaret's spiritual state, describing her as a devoted church member who attended services regularly. But when pressed about the cemetery chamber, about the other brides, about the unusual preservation, Hallowell became evasive. He spoke of God's mysterious ways and traditions we do not question. A visiting journalist from Pittsburgh, James Corrigan, happened to be in the area covering mining labor disputes. He heard about Margaret's case and attempted his own investigation. His articles, published in the Pittsburgh Gazette in November 1887, were the most detailed contemporary account available. Corrigan interviewed townspeople who would not speak to the sheriff. He documented a pervasive fear, a sense that certain topics were forbidden. One elderly resident, whose name Corrigan protected, told him, "The 5 families have an agreement. It's been this way since the beginning. Every generation they renew it. The brides are the price. Don't ask me the price of what. I don't know. Nobody who's not in it knows. But it's why the mines stay productive, why the town prospers, why the founding families stay in power." Corrigan attempted to inspect the cemetery chamber himself, but was physically prevented by town officials. He was told the chamber had been sealed for public safety, that the structure was unstable. Within a week of his articles being published, Corrigan received threats. He left Hollow Creek and never returned. But he did preserve his notes, and those notes contained details that never made it into his published articles. He described seeing town leaders meeting at night, lanterns in the cemetery, shadows moving between graves. He noted that the Caldwell estate had a private mausoleum separate from the public cemetery, and that this mausoleum appeared to have fresh excavation around its foundation. Dr. Ashford's role became more complex as the investigation continued. Publicly, he supported the official conclusion of death by misadventure. Privately, his journals revealed growing horror and a moral crisis. He began researching the history of Hollow Creek's founding families, examining old medical records, comparing the preservation techniques used on Margaret with those he had learned in Philadelphia. He discovered something disturbing. The chemical process used to preserve the brides was extremely sophisticated, requiring multiple compounds, precise timing, and detailed anatomical knowledge. It was not something that could be improvised. It was something that had been refined over many iterations, passed down, and improved across generations. In a journal entry, dated November 15, 1887, Dr. Ashford wrote, "I have compared the preservation method with my textbooks from medical school. The technique matches nothing in contemporary medical literature. It is older, much older. The compounds used include substances that were common in alchemical practices of the 17th century, but abandoned by modern chemistry. Whoever developed this method had access to both ancient Hermetic texts and modern anatomical knowledge. This is not folk practice. This is purposeful, deliberate, refined by people who understood exactly what they were doing. He also made a disturbing discovery about his own family's history. His grandfather, the first Dr. Ashford in Hollow Creek, had extensive notes on preservation of the sacred feminine form, hidden in a false bottom of his medical bag. These notes describe the brides not as victims, but as necessary vessels, as honored sacrifices, as bridges between generations. The notes also contained genealogies, careful tracking of bloodlines among the founding families, marking certain female children from birth as potential candidates. Margaret Whitmore's name appeared on this list, written when she was only 3 years old. So did Eleanor Ashford's. So did names of girls who were still living in 1887, girls who were currently children but would reach marriageable age in the coming years. Thomas Caldwell began drinking heavily after Margaret's death. His behavior became erratic. He was seen wandering the cemetery at night, talking to shadows. His father sent him away to cousins in Philadelphia, officially for rest and recovery. Thomas never returned to Hollow Creek. He died in 1891, at age 30, of what was officially listed as heart failure. His final letter, written to a friend and preserved in that friend's papers, stated simply, "I couldn't save her. I couldn't save any of them. The fathers decide and the sons obey, and the brides pay the price for prosperity none of them ever wanted." Now, before we continue deeper into what was discovered in that chamber, I want to pause and ask you, tell us in the comments what you think is happening so far. Is this a cult, a criminal conspiracy, something stranger? What would you do if you discovered your own family was involved in something like this? Share your thoughts. This is a community of people fascinated by the dark corners of history, and your theories matter. Because what comes next, what Dr. Ashford documented in the weeks and months following Margaret's death, what subsequent investigations uncovered, suggests that Hollow Creek's secret was far more elaborate, far more disturbing, and far older than anyone initially imagined. The stone chamber where Margaret Whitmore was found had been built in 1805, the same year Hollow Creek was founded. Official records listed it as a mausoleum for the founding families, a place of honor for the town's most prominent dead. But when Dr. Ashford, accompanied by a deputy sheriff who later refused to discuss what he witnessed, conducted a thorough examination of the space, they discovered it was something far more complex. The chamber was not a simple burial vault. It was a multi-room structure carved deep into the hillside, extending 30 feet underground. The entrance chamber, where Margaret had been found, was merely the beginning. Behind a false wall that Dr. Ashford discovered by noticing different acoustic properties in the stone, there was a larger space. This inner chamber contained 6 stone platforms arranged in a circle around a central altar. On each platform lay a body, perfectly preserved, each wearing a wedding dress from a different era of fashion. Sarah Blackwood, from 1814, still appearing as if she had died days rather than decades ago. Elizabeth Mercer, from 1823. Catherine Ashford, from 1831, Jonathan's great-aunt, who he had never known existed. Anne Whitmore, from 1842. Rebecca Caldwell, from 1856. Grace Mercer from 1869, Jonathan's sister, Eleanor. Dr. Ashford's medical report, the uncensored version found in his private papers, described his examination of these bodies in clinical detail. The preservation was unprecedented. Skin remained supple, hair retained its color and texture. The internal examination he performed on one body revealed that organs had been treated with a compound that prevented decay while maintaining cellular structure. This was decades ahead of any embalming technique known to medical science in 1887. But the bodies were not simply preserved. They had been positioned with deliberate care. Each lay with hands folded over a specific object, Sarah Blackwood held a silver locket containing hair. Elizabeth Mercer held a ring with an unusual black stone. Catherine Ashford held a small book bound in leather that crumbled when touched. Anne Whitmore held a dagger with symbols etched into the blade. Rebecca Caldwell held a vial of dark liquid. Grace Mercer held a key. The walls of this inner chamber were covered with inscriptions, not in English, but in Latin mixed with symbols that Dr. Ashford recognized from his studies of medical history as alchemical notation. He copied these inscriptions and later sent them to a professor of ancient languages at the University of Pennsylvania. The professor's reply, dated December 1887, was disturbing. The inscriptions described a ritual called Perpetua Matrimonia, eternal marriage. According to the translation, the ritual claimed to bind the life force of a young woman to a family line, ensuring prosperity, health, and continuation of power across generations. The woman's preservation was essential. She had to remain physically intact, eternally waiting, eternally bound. The ritual required the woman to be unmarried at death, but promised in marriage, specifically to a member of one of the founding families. Her preservation had to occur at a specific age, between 18 and 21, when, according to the text, the feminine essence is most potent for binding. The ritual also required the participation of all 5 founding families, each contributing an element. One provides the bride, one provides the preservation knowledge, one provides the sacred space, one provides the ritual words, one provides the binding object. Dr. Ashford realized with horror that his family's role had been the preservation knowledge. The medical expertise that he had been so proud of, that had helped so many people, was rooted in this dark purpose. His grandfather hadn't just been a country doctor. He had been the keeper of secrets, the one who perfected the chemical process that turned young women into eternal prisoners. The central altar in the chamber contained something even more disturbing, a large book bound in aged leather, written in multiple hands across decades. This book, which Dr. Ashford removed and hid, contained the complete history of the ritual. It listed every bride by name, the date of her preparation, the family members who participated, and the specific benefits each family received in return. Next to Sarah Blackwood's entry from 1814, the Caldwell mine struck new iron veins the following spring. Next to Elizabeth Mercer's entry from 1823, the Whitmore store expansion succeeded beyond projection. Next to Catherine Ashford's entry from 1831, Dr. Ashford's revolutionary fever treatment saved 43 lives. The correlation was there, documented by the participants themselves. Each sacrifice corresponded with a measurable increase in prosperity for the founding families. Mines struck new ore, businesses flourished, illnesses were cured, children were born healthy when they should have died. The book also contained something more disturbing: future names. Girls currently living in Hollow Creek marked from birth as potential candidates for future rituals. The book planned decades ahead, tracking bloodlines, noting which families were due to provide the next bride, calculating optimal timing based on astrological charts and mining surveys and business projections. Margaret Whitmore's death had not been random. It had been planned since she was a child. Dr. Ashford's investigation revealed that the ritual was managed by a formal organization called the Society of Eternal Foundation. This was not a loose collection of believers, but a structured entity with rules, membership, and systematic record-keeping. The society had been founded by the original 5 families in 1803, before they even left Massachusetts. Documents Dr. Ashford discovered suggested that the 5 families had been expelled from their original community precisely because of their unconventional beliefs about marriage, death, and prosperity. Reverend Silas Cartwright, the preacher they brought with them, had been defrocked by the Congregational Church in 1802 for heretical teachings regarding the sanctity of death. His journals, which Dr. Ashford found references to but never located, allegedly contained the theological justification for the ritual, blending Christian imagery with alchemical philosophy and older practices that may have dated back to medieval Europe. The society's membership was hereditary and exclusive. Only firstborn sons of the founding families were initiated, always at age 21, in a ceremony held in the underground chamber. Dr. Ashford had been invited to his own initiation in 1874, but had been away at medical school. The invitation had been quietly withdrawn, and the subject never mentioned again. Something he now understood was because his absence had been interpreted as unconscious rejection. But his father's diary, which Jonathan discovered in a locked desk after beginning his investigation, revealed that the family had always expected him to eventually join. His medical education was not just for helping people, it was training for his role as the family's preservationist, the one who would perfect and execute the technique that kept the brides eternally perfect. The society met 4 times per year, on the equinoxes and solstices, always at night, always in the cemetery chamber. These meetings were documented in minutes that Dr. Ashford found hidden in the church basement, concealed inside the binding of an old hymnal. The minutes were chilling in their bureaucratic normalcy. They discussed candidate selection with the same tone as a church board discussing new members. They debated optimal timing for the ritual based on business conditions and family needs. They voted on which family would provide the next bride with elaborate formulas considering each family's recent prosperity, the number of eligible daughters available, and the time since their last contribution. Margaret Whitmore had been selected by vote in 1882 when she was only 14 years old. The minutes from that meeting stated, "The Whitmore line is due to contribute. Margaret Elizabeth shows appropriate characteristics: health, beauty, docility, appropriate age. The family is financially stable enough to absorb the loss. Thomas Caldwell is proposed as the formal fiancé to establish proper binding." Motion carried, 5 votes in favor. 5 votes, 5 families, all in agreement. Margaret's fate decided before she could even understand what marriage meant. The society also maintained a separate ledger, tracking the benefits received after each ritual. This ledger was detailed and quantitative. After Sarah Blackwood in 1814, the Caldwell mine production increased by 42% within 1 year. After Elizabeth Mercer in 1823, the Whitmore store profits doubled in 18 months. After Catherine Ashford in 1831, the mortality rate from scarlet fever in Hollow Creek dropped to nearly 0, while surrounding towns suffered epidemics. The pattern was consistent across all 7 brides. Each sacrifice corresponded with measurable prosperity for the founding families specifically, not the town. Generally, the benefits were concentrated among those who participated in the ritual, but the ledger also revealed something darker. There were failed attempts, brides who had been prepared but whose preservation didn't take properly, whose bodies decayed despite the chemical treatment. These failures, 5 in total between 1814 and 1887, were documented in a separate section labeled Imperfect Bindings. The failed brides were quietly buried in unmarked graves. Their families were told they had died of sudden illness. The society experimented with different compounds, different timing, different ritual variations, gradually perfecting the technique across decades of trials. Dr. Ashford's grandfather had been responsible for most of these refinements. His medical notes, which Jonathan found horrifying to read, described experiments with different chemical combinations, different methods of arterial injection, different ways of preventing bacterial decay. The notes showed no moral conflict, no awareness that these were young women being turned into specimens. They were written in the same clinical tone as any medical research, as if the subjects were laboratory animals rather than daughters and sisters. The society also had contingency plans for discovery. If outsiders asked questions, specific cover stories were prepared. If legal authorities investigated, certain members had alibis ready. If journalists like James Corrigan became too persistent, threats and intimidation were authorized. The society had survived for 8 decades because it was not careless. It was meticulous, patient, and willing to do whatever necessary to protect its secret. And there were hints in the documents of something even more disturbing. References to sister societies in other isolated communities, mentions of correspondence with groups in Vermont, Virginia, and Ohio, suggestions that the Perpetua Matrimonia ritual was not unique to Hollow Creek, but part of a broader network of similar practices hidden in rural valleys and mountain towns where isolation allowed darkness to flourish unchallenged. By December 1887, Dr. Jonathan Ashford possessed enough evidence to expose the Society of Eternal Foundation and bring criminal charges against its members. He had documents, testimonies, physical evidence from the chamber, and his own medical expertise to prove that the brides had been murdered through a sophisticated process of chemical preservation disguised as natural death. But exposing the society meant exposing his own family. His grandfather had been the architect of the preservation technique. His father had participated in at least 2 rituals. His uncle was a current member, and his sister Eleanor was one of the brides, lying preserved in that underground chamber, victim of the very family that should have protected her. More pressingly, every authority figure in Hollow Creek was connected to the founding families. The sheriff was married to a Mercer. The judge was a Caldwell cousin. The mayor was a Blackwood. Even the newspaperman who ran the local weekly was financially dependent on the Whitmore store for advertising revenue. If Dr. Ashford went public, who would believe him? Who would prosecute? The 5 families controlled every aspect of power in Hollow Creek, and he had already seen what happened to outsiders who asked too many questions. James Corrigan had been driven away with threats. Other journalists who had expressed interest suddenly lost interest after receiving visits from town leaders. Dr. Ashford's journals from December 1887 through March 1888 document his mental and moral crisis. He wrote, "I am a physician. My oath is to do no harm. But how do I do no harm when the entire structure of this community is built on systematic harm? If I expose them, I destroy families, create chaos, orphan children whose fathers will hang. If I stay silent, more girls will die, more brides will be chosen, the ritual will continue." He also realized something terrifying. The society's ledger contained future names. The next bride had already been selected, scheduled for 1895, 8 years away. She was currently 10 years old, a child playing in the town square, completely unaware that her death had been planned and voted upon by men who smiled at her in church. Dr. Ashford made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He would not go public immediately. Instead, he would work from within, using his position as a respected physician and his family's insider status to gradually dismantle the society. He would document everything, preserve evidence, and wait for the right moment when exposure would not be dismissed or covered up. In January 1888, he approached Thomas Caldwell's father, Richard, and requested a meeting with the society's leadership. He claimed he wanted to understand his family's role, to accept his place in the tradition. It was a lie, a strategy to get close enough to sabotage future rituals. The meeting occurred on the spring equinox of 1888 in the underground chamber, surrounded by the preserved bodies of 7 brides. 5 men attended: Richard Caldwell, Samuel Mercer, Harrison Whitmore, Edmund Blackwood, and his own uncle, Marcus Ashford. Dr. Ashford's account of this meeting, written in cipher and decoded only in 1968, described the experience as surreal. The men were not monsters. They were ordinary, even kind. They spoke of the ritual with reverence, as a burden and an honor. They explained that the prosperity of Hollow Creek, the health of its children, the success of its businesses, all flowed from maintaining this covenant with forces they did not fully understand, but had learned to trust across generations. Richard Caldwell told Jonathan, "Your grandfather understood that some knowledge comes at a price. The brides understand too in the end. They are not victims. They are foundational, eternal, more honored than any of us will ever be." Samuel Mercer added, "Do you think we want this? Do you think I didn't weep when we chose my own daughter? But the alternative is worse. Before the covenant, our ancestors starved, their children died of fever, their minds collapsed. After the first bride, everything changed. We thrive because they endure." The men showed Jonathan documents they claimed proved the ritual's effectiveness, correlation charts, survival statistics, prosperity indices. They argued that 7 deaths across 84 years was acceptable when weighed against hundreds of lives saved, families fed, a community sustained. They invited him to accept his family's role, to learn the complete preservation technique, to become the next keeper of the sacred knowledge. They told him the society needed him, that his modern medical training could refine the process even further, make it more reliable, more perfect. Dr. Ashford agreed. Not because he believed, but because agreeing gave him access, time, and the trust of men who would otherwise watch him suspiciously. He spent the next year pretending to study his grandfather's notes, asking questions about the ritual's history, attending the quarterly meetings, slowly becoming accepted as a member. But secretly, he was copying everything. Every document, every ledger entry, every chemical formula. He photographed the chamber, the bodies, the inscriptions. He interviewed elderly townspeople under the guise of collecting medical histories, but actually gathering testimonies about past disappearances. He corresponded with legal experts in Philadelphia, using hypothetical language to understand what charges could be brought, what evidence would be needed, how to build a case that could not be dismissed. His plan was to wait until 1895, when the next bride was scheduled. He would document the entire process, from selection to execution, creating irrefutable evidence. Then he would take everything to federal authorities in Philadelphia, bypassing the corrupt local system entirely. But something happened in 1893 that changed everything. The 10-year-old girl who had been selected as the next bride, a Blackwood daughter named Sarah, died in a legitimate accident, kicked by a horse and killed instantly. The society had to choose a replacement. They selected Dr. Ashford's niece, his brother's daughter, 12-year-old Charlotte. The vote was unanimous. The Ashford family was due to contribute, and Charlotte showed appropriate characteristics. Jonathan's carefully maintained composure shattered. In the society meeting where Charlotte was chosen, he objected, argued, pleaded. He was told his emotional response was understandable, but that family sentiment could not override the covenant. His brother James, Charlotte's father, had voted in favor, understanding that this was the price of their family's prosperity. That night, Dr. Ashford made a different decision. He could not wait until 1895. He could not allow Charlotte to die. He had to act immediately, consequences be damned. He burned the chamber. On the night of June 15, 1893, Dr. Jonathan Ashford entered the underground chamber with kerosene and matches. He burned the documents, the ledgers, the ritual books. He tried to burn the bodies, though the chemical preservation made them resistant to flame. He destroyed decades of carefully maintained records. The fire was discovered before it could spread to the town above, but the damage was done. The inner chamber was gutted. The evidence was destroyed. The 7 brides were damaged beyond recognition, their eternal preservation finally broken. Dr. Ashford was arrested immediately. He confessed to arson, but not to his reasons. He claimed temporary insanity, grief over his sister's death, a delayed breakdown. He refused to speak about the society, about the ritual, about what he had discovered. The trial was brief. The founding families wanted it over quickly, quietly. Dr. Ashford was declared mentally incompetent and sent to the Allegheny Asylum for the Insane in Pittsburgh. He would spend the next 32 years there, dying in 1925 at age 72. But before he was taken away, he managed to hide copies of everything he had documented. He sent packages to lawyers, to journalists, to archives, with instructions that they be opened only after his death or after 25 years, whichever came first. Those packages, opened in 1918, would eventually expose Hollow Creek's darkest secret to the world. The story of Hollow Creek did not end in 1893. In fact, the destruction of the chamber and Dr. Ashford's arrest only marked the end of the ritual's documented phase. What happened afterward exists in fragments, pieces discovered across decades, each adding new dimensions to an already incomprehensible story. In 1918, Dr. Ashford's hidden packages reached their intended recipients. By then, most of the founding family's patriarchs from 1887 were dead. Thomas Caldwell had died in 1891. Richard Caldwell in 1909. Most of the original society members had passed away, and those who remained were elderly men facing the end of their lives. A Pennsylvania state investigator named Robert Finch was assigned to examine Dr. Ashford's evidence. His report, filed in November 1918, concluded that while the documents appeared genuine, the passage of time made prosecution impossible. Most alleged perpetrators were dead. Physical evidence had been destroyed in the fire. Witnesses were unreliable or deceased. But Finch did make one disturbing discovery. Charlotte Ashford, the girl whose selection had triggered Dr. Ashford's desperate act, had disappeared in 1897 at age 16. Official records stated she had run away from home, a not uncommon occurrence. But Finch found a letter from Charlotte to a school friend, dated 1896, in which she wrote, "They still meet in the ruins. I've seen them. They rebuilt something underneath. I think they're going to try again, even without the chamber. I think they're going to use me." Charlotte's body was never found. Finch attempted to interview her father, James Ashford, but the man had suffered a stroke and could not communicate. He died 3 weeks after Finch's visit, and his family immediately left Hollow Creek, selling their property to the Caldwell estate. In 1932, a graduate student from the University of Pittsburgh named Margaret Dawson wrote her thesis on death rituals in isolated Appalachian communities. Her research brought her to Hollow Creek, where the town had dwindled to fewer than 100 residents. The mines had played out. Most families had left. The 5 founding bloodlines were reduced to a handful of elderly residents and scattered descendants. Dawson interviewed these survivors and recorded their testimonies. One woman, 92 years old, the granddaughter of one of the founding families, spoke with surprising frankness. She said, "They thought they could make a deal with death, take one to save many. But deals with death never work the way you think. The prosperity came, yes, but it was hollow. Families torn apart by guilt and fear. Children grew up knowing their sisters might be chosen. What kind of prosperity is built on that?" Another elderly resident told Dawson, "The chamber burning should have ended it, but some of them tried to continue. They met in secret, in basements, in the woods. Without the preservation knowledge, without Dr. Ashford's expertise, they couldn't do the ritual properly. But they tried. Girls still disappeared. 1897, 1904, 1911. We all knew, but nobody spoke. The society was weaker, but not dead. Dawson's thesis was rejected by her academic committee as insufficiently sourced and too sensationalistic. She abandoned academia and became a journalist, but never published anything about Hollow Creek. In a letter to a friend in 1935, she wrote, "Some stories are too dark, too complicated, too close to still living people. I learned things in Hollow Creek that made me question whether some secrets should be exposed or simply allowed to die with those who kept them." In 1951, a construction crew working on a new highway near the former site of Hollow Creek unearthed a secondary burial ground. It contained remains of at least 12 young women buried without ceremony in unmarked graves. Forensic analysis determined the burials dated from the early 1800s through the early 1900s. Several showed evidence of chemical treatment consistent with attempted preservation. These were the failed attempts, the brides whose preservation didn't take properly, whose bodies had been quietly disposed of when the ritual didn't work as intended. The discovery made regional newspapers but was quickly overshadowed by other news. The remains were reburied in a county cemetery and a small plaque was placed. Unknown women remembered. In 1963, a fire at the Allegheny Asylum destroyed much of their historical records, but not before a researcher named Thomas Brennan, grandson of the sheriff who had investigated Margaret's death, copied Dr. Ashford's asylum journals. These journals revealed that Ashford never recanted, never doubted his decision to destroy the chamber. He wrote in 1920, "I saved Charlotte, even if only for a few years. I broke the ritual, even if they tried to continue without me. I did what my oath demanded. I have no regrets, only sorrow for those I couldn't save sooner." The journals also contained something unexpected. Letters from other asylum inmates, men sent there from different parts of Pennsylvania, describing similar rituals in their own communities. One man from a mountain town in Clearfield County described a society that preserved brides in ice caves. Another from Erie County mentioned a group that practiced wedding burials, where young women were entombed alive with corpses of deceased family patriarchs. Dr. Ashford had collected these testimonies, documented patterns, tried to prove that Hollow Creek was not unique but part of a broader phenomenon. He had sent letters to authorities, to newspapers, to anyone who might listen. All were dismissed. He was, after all, an inmate in an asylum, his credibility destroyed by his own actions. In 1977, a documentary filmmaker named Sarah Chen attempted to create a film about Hollow Creek. She tracked down descendants of the founding families, now scattered across Pennsylvania, Ohio, and beyond. Most refused to speak. Those who did speak gave carefully worded non-answers. One descendant, a Caldwell grandson living in Philadelphia, told her off-camera, "My grandfather never spoke about Hollow Creek. On his deathbed, he told my father one thing: the brides are still waiting. That's all. My father never explained what it meant, and I never asked." Chen's documentary was never completed. Her funding fell through after her preliminary footage was reviewed by her production company. In an interview years later, she said, "I was told the content was too disturbing, too unverifiable, too legally risky, but I think the real reason was that the story suggested these rituals might still be happening, might still exist in isolated places. Nobody wanted to open that door." In 1989, the last remaining building from original Hollow Creek, the church, was demolished. Workers found a sealed vault beneath the altar. Inside were more documents, including a ledger that extended beyond 1893. The final entry was dated 1923. "No candidates available, bloodlines dispersed, covenant suspended, to be resumed when families reunite." The ledger also contained current addresses of descendants, tracking the founding families across the country, noting births of daughters, calculating when enough of the bloodline might be reconvened to resume the ritual. This ledger was turned over to Pennsylvania State Police, who conducted a brief investigation. They concluded that while disturbing, the documents described historical crimes beyond any statute of limitations and a conspiracy that no longer existed in actionable form. The case was closed, but one detective in his closing notes wrote, "Interviewed 12 descendants. Most claimed ignorance of family history. 2 refused to speak entirely. 1, a woman in her 60s, told me, every generation someone tries to bring it back. They think they can do it right this time, do it safely, keep the prosperity without the guilt. They're always wrong, but they always try." When I asked if she thought anyone was trying now, she said, "I don't know, but I tell my daughters to avoid family reunions." Hollow Creek no longer exists as a town. The few buildings that remained were abandoned by the 1960s. The cemetery, what's left of it, is overgrown, forgotten, accessible only by hiking trails that wind through Pennsylvania state forest land. The stone chamber where Margaret Whitmore and the other brides were found collapsed in the 1970s. Whether from structural instability or deliberate destruction, nobody knows. But the questions remain, unanswered and perhaps unanswerable. Did the ritual actually work? The prosperity correlations documented in the society's ledgers seem too consistent to be coincidence. Yet prosperity can always be attributed to luck, good business sense, fortunate timing. We have no way to prove causation. We only have the words of men who believed, who convinced themselves that sacrificing daughters and sisters brought tangible rewards. Was Dr. Jonathan Ashford a hero or a destroyer of evidence? He saved his niece, possibly. Charlotte disappeared after his arrest, suggesting the society tried to continue. But by burning the chamber, he also destroyed proof that could have brought legal consequences to guilty men. His choice to wait, to infiltrate rather than immediately expose, allowed time for potential additional victims. His motivations were complex: protection, revenge, delayed justice, family loyalty conflicting with moral duty. How many other communities had similar practices? The testimonies Dr. Ashford collected from other asylum inmates suggest Hollow Creek was not unique. The references to sister societies in the ritual documents imply a network, but without evidence, without investigations, we can only speculate. How many isolated mountain towns, hidden valleys, insular communities might have harbored similar darkness? How many missing young women might have been victims not of random violence, but of systematic ritual murder? And most disturbingly, did it truly end? The 1923 ledger entry suggests the society believed the covenant could be resumed. The 1989 discovery of updated addresses tracking descendants suggests someone at some point after 1893 continued monitoring the bloodlines. The detective's interview with the woman who warned her daughters about family reunions suggests knowledge still passed down, warnings still given. There are 3 main theories about what happened in Hollow Creek, and none can be definitively proven or dismissed. The first theory, it was exactly what it appeared to be: a death cult, a criminal conspiracy spanning generations, using pseudoscience and ritual to justify the systematic murder of young women. The prosperity was coincidental, confirmation bias, self-fulfilling prophecy. The guilty men convinced themselves they were serving a higher purpose to avoid facing that they were simply murderers. The ritual had no supernatural power, only the very real power of collective delusion and patriarchal control. The second theory, there was something more, something we don't understand. The preservation technique was too advanced, too effective, too consistent across decades. The prosperity correlations were too precise. Perhaps there are forces in the world that respond to human action in ways that science cannot yet explain or measure. Perhaps the founding families stumbled onto something real, something that worked. And the moral horror of how it worked doesn't change the fact that it did work. The third theory, the ritual was real, but so was the curse. Every family that participated was destroyed eventually. The Caldwells, Mercers, Ashfords, Whitmores and Blackwoods all suffered tragedies, mental illness, early deaths, and family dissolution. By the mid-20th century, their bloodlines were scattered, their prosperity gone, their town abandoned. Perhaps the ritual did provide temporary prosperity, but the price was always greater than expected, paid not just by the brides but by everyone who participated across generations until the families themselves ceased to exist in any meaningful form. To this day, hikers who find the remains of Hollow Creek report strange experiences. A sense of being watched, the smell of chemicals like formaldehyde with no source, the sound of wedding bells from abandoned churches, shadows moving between overgrown grave markers. These reports are anecdotal, unverifiable, easily dismissed as imagination influenced by knowing the town's history, but they persist year after year, decade after decade. People visit seeking the thrill of dark history and leave disturbed by something they can't quite articulate. The seven brides, Margaret Whitmore, Sarah Blackwood, Elizabeth Mercer, Catherine Ashford, Anne Whitmore, Rebecca Caldwell and Grace Mercer remain the heart of this story. Young women who never chose their fates, who were selected by vote, prepared by ritual, preserved by science perverted to serve darkness. Their names should be remembered, their stories should be told, not to glorify the horror of what was done to them, but to ensure that we never forget what happens when communities decide that prosperity justifies any price, that tradition excuses any crime, that secrecy allows any atrocity. Hollow Creek is gone, but its lesson remains. Darkness flourishes in isolation, cruelty hides behind respectability, and the most dangerous monsters are the ones who believe they're doing good. Before we end, I want to hear from you one final time. What do you think really happened in Hollow Creek? Do you believe there are other towns with similar secrets? Have you ever lived in a community that felt like it was hiding something? Share your theories, your experiences, your thoughts in the comments below. If this story affected you, if it made you think, if it disturbed you in ways you can't quite shake, then subscribe to our channel, ring that notification bell, join our haunted community of people who believe that the darkest truths are worth uncovering, worth discussing, worth remembering. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the shadows of American history. Until next time, stay curious, stay skeptical, and remember, some small towns have very big secrets.